Hey, welcome everybody. I hope you are here. We had some technical difficulties getting started with our first live broadcast. So I am hoping you're in the room waiting to chat with me. And if you're not, you'll get to come in a little bit later and hopefully you'll just catch up with us. So I'm glad to be here. This is, as I said, the first video, live video I'm going to do on criminal profiling. And today's video is on criminal profiling and criminal profilers and the real world of that, because a lot of people have very strange ideas about what criminal profiling and, what criminal profilers actually do and who they are. As you can see behind me, we watch a lot of Criminal Minds, and Criminal Minds is, shall we say, pretty much complete fiction, not only for the fun of the fiction and making interesting stories, but the entire concept of criminal profiling and criminal profilers. So today I'm going to try to get rid of some of those strange concepts people have about all of that. So get ready, and we're going to see what happens. And we're going to talk about, and I hope you're going to have your questions ready, because that's going to be a lot of fun when you have the questions ready for me. For example, this never happens. I mean, as a criminal profiler, I never jumped on a fancy, look at this fancy plane, woohoo, woohoo, look at that. That's what the Criminal Minds team always takes to a crime. As a matter of fact, what usually happens in the story is that there's some small police department someplace, and they have some serial killer running around, and they're like killing somebody every other week. And so then they don't know what to do. So they call the FBI and tell them, quick, hurry, help us. Jump on a plane, even if we're only a 4-hour drive away, jump on the plane anyway and come and help us out. Now, let me tell you, no police department does that. First of all, they don't want to admit there is a serial killer in their town. That would kind of scare everybody. So they keep that on the quiet. And they rarely have serial killers killing somebody every week or every month, or with the moon, as they say. So what happens is you'll have to have a lot of crimes build up till you get to the point of, wow, there's 20 dead women over the period of six years, or maybe there's at least 4 dead women over the period of 2 years. And then when the public gets a hold of this information, then they're maybe forced to contact the FBI and to tell the public, we're doing everything we can. Let's have one of the profilers look at the case. But even then, they never jump on a plane and go to the crime scene. They stay right there in Quantico, Virginia, and they write up their profile and they send it over. On very rare occasions, extremely rare occasions, they will show up on a later date. I believe that happened with the Atlanta child killings, and I'm not even sure if it happened with Long Island serial killer, that they finally showed up on the scene to look around. But generally speaking, that is not the way it works. So nobody jumps on this plane and goes anyplace. And here, let's say, if you want to take a look at where they say you're going to be on that plane, how about this? Yeah, like I'm going to be sitting in this fancy situation. If I go any place to work on a crime, I'm in coach. That's how I get there. And then I rent a car and I go to the police department. But I'm not on a fancy plane like this. When I get to the police department, here's my surroundings. Check that out. That's really attractive. It's an interview room. And I would go in there and say, bring me all the boxes, bring me all the evidence. And they set that in a row and they say, see you later. We'll check in on you. and I would spend 8 to 10 hours a day, maybe for a week, in this room. And so it's not glamorous. It's not like Criminal Minds makes it look like. It is kind of, it's not quite that, let's say. So I want you all to understand how it really works. So this is what we're here for today, to find out how it really works. You're going to find I'm going to be a little bit difficult trying to figure out how to work this particular methodology here today. So I'm looking forward to your comments. Oh, and I see some coming in. Oh, great. Some people are here. It's really nice to see. Thank you. Thank you, Christine, for saying it's going to be phenomenal. And I say it's a new method for me. I've never done live YouTube. And as you can see, I've got these glasses on, which are now reflecting, which kind of sucks. But if I don't put them on, I can't read any of the comments. So I have to put them on. So so I appreciate you. I'm trying to stay away from a little away from the computer so that they don't reflect too much. But that is a problem, and I'm working on how to deal with that. But one thing I want to tell you, what is really cool about being here on video on YouTube, is that I have time to talk about things. I have time to answer questions. When I've done TV, and I've done a lot of it, I've done over 3,000 appearances over 15 years of time that I was on TV, doing crime news commentary on all the major networks. And when you go, if you're lucky, you get an actual 5 minutes where they're actually asking you questions and you can give some decent answers. But a lot of times you don't get that. So you just get your sound bite and you go, well, yes, I believe it could be a serial killer. Oh, thank you, Pat. Oh, great. And I didn't get to explain anything else. So that really sucks. So, hey, Cheryl, nice to have you here. Oh, and Annie. Hello, Annie. Nice to have you here too. And of course, Lizzie, nice to have you here. So I'm so glad to have people here today on this new venture. And I'm sure as the weeks go on, and I do this on a weekly basis, we probably will see more people coming in live, because they'll know it exists and I'll know how to operate this thing here. So anyway, today, what I specifically want to talk about is exactly what criminal profiling is and what criminal profilers actually do. And I think there's oh my God, there is so much misconceptions. It's pretty sad. And I wanted to explain the difference between each one of them. And then I say your comments, so please ask your questions as I go along. It may take me a while to figure out how to poke at these different things on the screen so they can answer your questions, but if they're there, I'll come back and check on them. So we have one right here, right now. What is the comment? Oh, it's Roberta. Roberta's here. Hi, Roberta. Nice to have you here. So anyway, I'm going to start with 4 types of profilers, because people think there's only one type of profiler, and it's usually FBI profilers, and everybody else doesn't exist. And when the other people exist, they're kind of pushed down because the FBI doesn't really like the competition. So they might call them independent, if you're lucky, independent profilers. What they call me is self-made, so they can really insult me. So that's usually what they say when they want to say, oh, or that television lady. I've heard that one, that television lady, not the profiler, that television lady. So there is actually 4 different types of profilers, and it is important to know what they are. First one, television profiler. And you might wonder what that is. Well, that means a commentator like myself who has been on television for years, and every time there's a big crime, they would call me up and say, Pat, can you be in the studio? And they'd send a car for me. I go to the studio, and we talk about whatever crime it is. Now, I saw a very funny video when I was checking out the other profiling videos on YouTube. And the funny video was this. This woman's on there, and she's talking about what profiling should be. And she started talking about the DC snipers, which was, a long time ago, and one of my earliest, I think, appearances on television. And I did comment on that, and so did some FBI profilers. So she was kind of basically trashing all of us. But the one thing she said about me, the self-made profiler, of course, was that Pat Brown said this, and she puts up this clip, and the clip was me saying something like, he might, he's really into power and control, the thrill of, fooling everybody, the thrill of beating the police, to the punch on things, and being in the newspapers. He might watch movies, that show a lot of that kind of a thing where the person is really in control. And she jumped on the words he, because if you remember the DC snipers, there were 2 of them. And so it turned out to be a duo. And she goes, see, Pat Brown said just one. She was completely wrong. Okay, here's how television works. First of all, you're not privy to the police information. You pretty much know what everybody else knows that's been in the media, and it's pretty crummy information. So what happens is the media calls you up and says, Pat, can you be in the studio? Yes, I can. I go there and they say, so Pat, and now remember, I have to answer the question they ask, not something else. So they say, what kind of guy do you think he is? And I say, well, he could be, because I answered the question. Now here comes somebody years later and says, see, she's wrong. It wasn't just one guy. Well, I wasn't talking about whether it could be two people. I was talking about what kind of guy, because that's what they asked me. So what happens is TV profiling isn't really TV profiling. It's entertainment. It's sometimes education. And I tried to make that my part when I did these shows, was to educate people as much as I could about how serial killers operate, how crime scenes are analyzed, to give people ideas of how it all worked. But I'm not looking at the police reports. I'm not sitting down and analyzing anything. I'm just that TV commentator. So that's just really, really not a profiling thing. So we can take that and just shove it aside. So now we have three kinds of profilers. And I'm going to tell you what those are, because that's really important. The first profiler out there, what I consider the father of deductive profiling, who would that be? Does anybody remember this? I'm going to pull this up and somebody can, maybe one of your commenters can tell me, who is this? Remember who that is? Anybody know who that is? I got any commenters out there who know who that is? Come on now. That's Sherlock Holmes. Okay, so we have Sherlock Holmes, and he actually did a thing called deductive profiling. What that means is he studied the evidence, and he didn't make up stuff. He didn't go with his emotions. He was a very emotionless guy. He studied the evidence, and he looked at physical evidence, and he looked at behavioral evidence. And from that, he made deductions. And when he made his deductions, what was great about him was that he said exactly why he said what he said. So he didn't just say, it's a white guy who lives with his mother and has a green car. And you got that from the crime scene? Oh, well, it's from my experience. No. If you're going to say anything like that, you have to have evidence that supports that. So Sherlock Holmes actually did that in the series. Now, you wonder who's behind Sherlock Holmes. Well, it's this guy. That is Sir Arthur Conan Doyle, and he's what we call the father of deductive profiling, because he actually was a doctor, first of all, and he actually was the first Innocent Project guy, really. He was trying to get people who he thought had been wrongly accused out of prison by then analyzing all the evidence and proving that they didn't do it. These days, the Innocent Project just wants to get people off death row, and they don't really care so much about the truth of evidence and whether the guy is guilty. But this guy actually cared about the evidence. So he's our father of criminal profiling, and that's of deductive criminal profiling. And that is the kind of profiling I do. But then something happened along the way, and it was called this. And a lot of people just absolutely adore John Douglas. He wrote the book Mindhunter. He was in the FBI, as they put on the book, the elite serial killer crime unit. And he used a methodology developed by the FBI called inductive profiling. Inductive profiling came from their studies. They had a lot of studies that were going on. They did some really cool studies, I must say. They went into the prisons and they talked to serial killers who probably lied to them and played with them, but they got a lot of information. They studied cases that they had, and they came to some different conclusions about what kind of people do what. But what happened over the time was they developed inductive profiling sort of based on statistics and kind of their experience, shall we say, which, using just your experience and saying, oh, well, I've been around a long time, so I know what I'm doing. So it's a white guy who's 30 to 40 years old, lives with his mother, has a knife collection, and probably has a dog. And you say, did you get this from the evidence, or are you just making that stuff up? And since, you can sort of guess your way through about 80% of, what you see in a crime and get it right. I mean, obviously, if a woman's raped, it's probably a guy, you can do things like that. And they found out actually that when they asked regular folks to profile crimes away, and they came up pretty close to the FBI abilities. So something's wrong with that picture, and it really didn't work to solve crimes either, which was interesting that those methodologies haven't proven to be successful, although they don't want to admit it. So this was something that they had some good information going. The FBI does some great things, certainly does great things with DNA, the lab work that they do, the CODIS that you can match cold case crime DNA with somebody who's maybe in prison or even not in prison, and you can catch somebody who you couldn't find before. Fabulous, that's fabulous. But the method of inductive profiling uses a lot of guesswork, and you don't have to say where you came up with your conclusions. To me, it's just unacceptable. But it became really, really popular. And do you know why it became popular? Because of this. Remember this? Silence of the Lambs. Oh, and by the way, I am going to have one of my playlists is going to be Profiler at the Movies. And this is going to be my first discussion on that. I'll be probably putting that out this week. And I talk about not whether the movie's good or bad, because it's actually kind of a cool, scary movie. And a lot of people loved it. But I'm talking about the profiling issues in the movie, things that are really, really silly. And that's just not the way profiling works at all. So, but this movie popularized the FBI profiling. And the Crawford fellow, who was the boss of Clarice, that was based on John Douglas. So, I'm going to say it's very, very fictionalized, and that started everything, and that's what led to eventually Criminal Minds and almost every other FBI kind of profiling show that we get. But the accuracy of it, unfortunately, is not really there. So that is problematic. So, oh, look, Annie came up. Hey, you said Sherlock. Well, I missed you on that one, but you were correct. I want to show one other thing with, here's my, so now let's go to my version. Okay, this is my profiling agency. And you'll notice something different on mine. It says I have investigative criminal profiling. It's a method I'm working with to expand to police detectives. It's called investigative criminal profiling. And you might say, how is that different from the deductive profiling you were just talking about? Well, it's like this. I worked a lot of cases in my life, going around the country, working on cold cases, and I did the deductive profiling. I went to the departments and I sat down in those departments and I went through all the evidence, sometimes spending an entire week there. And I came up with my profile, my crime scene analysis, and I did all of that. But what happens is, even though I explained exactly how I found everything, even if I came up with a very good suspect who probably actually did it, it was too late. It's 4 years too late. It's 5 years too late. It's 10 years too late. Sometimes 20 years too late. And when the police look at it and say, wow, that probably is the guy, but we don't have the evidence. And if we don't have the evidence, we can't go after the guy. So that's really, quite frankly, not going to work out terribly well. So what we have to do at that point is say to ourselves, maybe cold case work isn't very successful. And I know everybody wants to believe in cold cases, me too, because it's really fun to work on them. But cold cases are usually solved by DNA analysis, period. DNA analysis. They finally, they find some DNA that's been sitting around for 20 years, and now they have new techniques and they're able to match it to somebody, but they bring him in after he's already killed 10 people. It's a little late sometimes. So the problem with cold case analysis is doesn't work usually because the evidence is already long gone, or the guy's already been out there for too many years. So I call it investigative criminal profiling, because guess when criminal profiling should be used, and guess who should be using it? And those people are detectives who are working on their cases, and in the first 48, just like we always hear, the first 48, because your evidence does disappear, your witnesses disappear, your suspect gets rid of everything, he disappears. So you really want to move quickly. The problem is some of the trickier cases that aren't involving somebody, for example, you have a homicide go down and you go and you ask, here's a dead guy on the ground, and you say, who did it? And the neighbor goes, oh yeah, it's Joe over there, you just shot him. Okay, that's going to be your easy case. And then you have other cases where the motive isn't really tricky. It's a drug hit or something like that. And you can follow the evidence. You're looking at speed, you're looking at cameras that are tracking cars, and you can do all these kind of great detective work, and you can finally get the guy. But there are those weird crimes which the detectives walk in and go, whoa, okay then, not quite sure what happened, not quite sure why it happened. And the problem is there isn't training for that. And so there's a lot of guesswork. Well, it looks like it could be this, it looks like it could be that. And by the time the case just goes cold because they're looking at the wrong investigative avenue, well, that's the problem. So what I'm developing is a methodology that the detectives can use, because criminal profiling actually belongs to the detectives, much as some of us would like to think. It would be nice I would love to be a criminal profiler in many police departments, but they're not inclined at this point to hire criminal profilers and bring them into the department. And they don't even want criminal profilers coming in any more than the FBI, because when we come in as an independent, they're afraid that if we do find something, it will make them look bad. And politics rules, and you're in a whole lot of trouble if you can't do anything. If you can't tell the public, well, yeah, the profiler came in, she showed us exactly who the killer was and all this evidence to back it up, but we screwed that case up. Who wants to say that? And that's going to get you fired. I mean, you're going to get your department in a whole bunch of trouble. Hi, Sue. Nice to have you here. Oh, look what Annie said. Hate that movie. Silence of the Lambs. Yeah, me too. I also hate that movie pretty well, only because I know it's so ridiculously wrong. And you got to tune in to my video on that, because I am going to tear that up. Not the acting, which was fabulous, not the videography, which was excellent. The pace of the movie, great. I mean, if I didn't know anything about profiling, I would love that movie. But I know a lot about profiling, and I know it's just so ridiculous, absolutely ridiculous what happened in the movie. It's not the way serial killers behave. It's not the way profilers behave. As a matter of fact, good old Clarice, she was a trainee. How the heck is she doing profiling work as a trainee? Does somebody explain that to me? Anybody know out there how she got that job, when actually to become a profile in the FBI, you have to be a full agent. You probably have worked as an agent for 10, 15, 20 years. And then maybe you'll get into the unit, maybe after that. And there's only like 9 FBI profilers actually functioning in the unit anyway. So it's not like you're going to be a trainee and suddenly they're just going to give you this great, huge case and you're going to run around investigating it. And of course, she understands how it works too, because she goes, oh, I know he's this and I know he's that. Hey, that's absolutely impossible. That is not something that's going to happen. So that I'm going to go into all the details of that when I do that particular movie, which I say should be this week. And it's going to be under a group of things, which I'm calling Profiler at the Movies. And the one following that movie is going to be one of my favorite movies of all time, called Eye for an Eye. It's with Sally Field and Kiefer Sutherland. And he plays the creepiest serial killer that's accurate that I've ever seen. And that movie shows the way probably things really go down. And so that will be my next Profiler at the Movies. Oh, I also want to say what we're going to have on this channel, so that you know what we have coming up. Hold on, I gotta get something to drink. Not alcohol, just soda. Okay. Anyway, all right. So, what are we going to have on this channel for you in the future? We are going to have Sunday, which is what we're doing today. It'll be live every Sunday at 3, barring, I'm in Hawaii or something and I just don't want to be on. So we're going to do this at 3, and what we're going to do on Sundays is basically a lot of what you want. So are the cases you're interested in, are the aspects of profiling you want to know about. What if you want to know a little bit about serial killers? I'm going to sort of jump around to all those fun things that we can talk about and that you can ask questions about. It's going to be just a fun day that you get to actually communicate with a profiler, which is one thing that's cool about this, because, when you do television, you never talk with anybody. You're just going, you do your little bit, you go home, and you never really get to communicate with the public and people who are really interested. So this is really kind of fun for me, because it's just, I like you guys, and it's nice to not be in a fancy television studio, and I look better in the studio, but hey, it is what it is. And but I'm glad to be here with you. So on Sundays we'll do that. I don't have a particular length of time. We'll just do a little something, talk about things, and then we'll be back next Sunday for some more. And then we have, as I pointed out, we have Profile at the Movies, and then I have another playlist I'm going to do, which is called. That one is, I'm going to sit here and forget my playlist. Oh yeah, Profiling History. Because I do love some historic crimes. I wrote this book. Anybody has a book? This is Annie's favorite, because I know Annie happens to like this book a lot. She's been probably my favorite person with that particular. I'm going to take the Hate the movie off of that, just so that you can see the book. So Murder of Cleopatra. In 2004, I did a documentary for Discovery Channel. And I went to Egypt, and I analyzed the death of Cleopatra. Was she really killed by a snake? And for 2,000 years, everybody said yes, and I said no. And now I proved that, and now that has been removed from the history. And now the historians and Egyptologists will say no, she wasn't killed by a snake. But there was so much more to what happened to her. So if she wasn't killed by a snake, how did she die? And I went back to Egypt, did research, and wrote The Murder of Cleopatra. And so one of my profiling history playlists is going to be about Cleopatra, and I'm going to go through what actually happened to Cleopatra and a number of different shows. And then I'm also going to do, because of course this is everybody's fave. That's the wrong guy. That's not him. That's the nice guy. This guy. Aha. Okay. Jack the Ripper. Because that has been going on. I did a mystery show. It was called Mystery Channel, I believe. And I went to England and I did this show on Jack the Ripper. And it was really kind of sad, because there's a guy there in England, and it was kind of terrible. He does these tours of London. He does the Jack the Ripper tours, and apparently he came up with this concept, this great idea of who Jack the Ripper was and how it went down. And so the production company called me and said, he's caught this great idea, and we want you to come and profile this with, he's going to be doing the show, and we want you to profile it. And I looked at it and I said, I'm sorry, I can't do the show because it's ludicrous. I mean, maybe a nice guy, does great tours. I cannot back this. I mean, there's just no way I can do this. It's just no. And so they asked me what my thoughts were, and I sent them over my profile of Jack the Ripper. And they called me back and they said, okay, we want you to do the show. We want you to be the host and profile. We're just going to do the show with you. And I felt really bad, because this poor guy, I mean, it's just, it's probably his chance in a lifetime. I felt kind of sick about it, except for the fact that the idea was so ludicrous. It just really, wasn't a good profile. So I did go to England and I profiled the crime. And so I'm going to be doing a series on Jack the Ripper and who Jack the Ripper really was. And I can tell you right now, he's not the prince. So you're going to have to tune in and find out he wasn't the prince running around killing prostitutes. That's just kind of stupid. So anyway, but it makes people go, oh, the prince, oh my God, he was a rich guy and he's doing it. No, not the prince, but I'll do more about that later. And all the other playlist I'm going to do is the Pat Brown School of Criminal Profiling. This is not investigative criminal profiling, because we're not doing real cases. This is going to be showing you how deductive profiling works, how you profile the physical behavior and the behavioral evidence. The physical evidence and the behavioral evidence, and just different aspects of profiling. And so I'm going to do segments of that. So if you're interested in this or interested in that, you could be a real detective. You could be a police officer. You could be an armchair detective, just somebody interested and wants to know more about how you do this. And so I'm going to do different aspects of that, of crime scene analysis, and also about psychopaths and how they work. Because I thought I want to mention this to you. I developed the first criminal profiling program in the United States for Excelsior College, and unfortunately, they kind of screwed the program up. And so, but I developed 5 courses for that. The first one, and it's always funny when they say, "Oh, Pat Brown, you don't have any credentials." I'm like, well, I couldn't take my own course. So I don't have a certificate for it, because I made the course. But in that course, I had in there criminal profiling methodology, a crime scene analysis, the psychology of violent crime. What was the other one? Oh, forensic pathology and serial homicide and serial crimes. And that's what I'm going to use that kind of concept for this school, so that you all can just learn different things about criminal profiling. And you say, oh, I want to know about blood spatter pattern. Oh, I want to know about, this kind of psychopath. What is a psychopath? And you can just click on different things and learn at your own speed what you would like to know. Let me see, I have some comments here and I want to answer some of them. Might be a question. Oh, goodness gracious. Okay. All right. Roberta, yes. Have you looked at the Stephen Avery and Brendan Dassey case? Yes, I have. And I can tell you, Making a Murderer was the biggest atrocity ever made by Netflix. It was absolutely appalling because they gave a one-sided story, which was all from the defense point of view, and they hid all the real true evidence. And I have looked at that. Yes, Stephen Avery is about as guilty gets. Absolutely, hands down, killed that girl. The evidence was overwhelming. And that they put this out and people are trying to get him freed is concerning. As far as Brendan Dassey goes, well, I believe he was there. He was young, easy to persuade. We can make a different case for him, although believe me, he was there. And he confessed over and over. But Stephen Avery, the guy is an absolute flaming psychopath. And I will do a whole bit on that, making a murderer travesty. And I know a lot of people got pulled into it because, hey, look, this is what happens with television. They have an agenda, and they decide what their agenda is going to be. Now, proving him guilty when he's already been proven guilty is not going to sell anything. So they go, okay, what about if we say he's not guilty? Ooh, then we'll get lots of people wanting to free him, which is exactly what happened. They made, mega millions of dollars off of that. And that's what they do. As a matter of fact, that's why I've stopped doing documentaries for the most part, because I did one on Michael Skakel and the case up in, now I'm forgetting where it was, Connecticut, Martha Moxley case. That was Skakel was a Kennedy cousin, and he supposedly killed Martha Moxley. Well, they called me up. Oh, come in. We want your expertise in it. And 10 years ago, when they said that, they meant it. Now they have an agenda, but they don't tell you that when they call you. We want your expertise because you believe that Michael Skakel could be innocent. I said, okay. So they hired me. I went to Baltimore, and really cool looking setup. I'm sitting there and they're questioning me. And halfway through the questioning, I said, well, this is a setup. I am being set up. Sure enough, when the show came out, they edited out my evidence, only presented a piece of it, and then I was just trashed. I was trashed. Oh, what a moron! She's a complete idiot. She thinks this, because the whole point was to prove Michael Skakel was actually guilty. They didn't care about the truth. They didn't care about the evidence. It's the agenda, because that is what makes money. So, so we have to be careful about that. Let me see what else we got. Oh, here. Oh, let me check this one out. This is interesting. Florence, have you ever been approached by current suspects or persons of interest in order to exonerate them, as John Douglas was by John Ramsey? How do you feel about the ethics of that situation? Yeah, here's an interesting thing, Florence. If you don't want to make money, yeah, Just be honest and tell the defense attorney your guy's guilty as sin. As a matter of fact, I just got a call last week about a case that's in California. It's a cold case that they now have a suspect for, and I'm not going to say the name right at this moment because I'm still waiting to hear back from these defense attorneys. So they called me and said, we read your book, The Profiler, and let me put that up. I'll show you what book that is. Let me see. Where's my Profiler book? Which came out a long time ago. Okay, here's my Profiler book. And hold on a second. Okay, so this is The Profiler. I wrote this book many years ago after I found that when I was working cases, that the cold cases, as I was pointing out, that a lot of times here's all the evidence that proved probably who did it, and here's why the case never went to court. I was very honest about why cold cases don't get to court and why even if you're successfully solve the case, and when I say solve the case, you know, it's one thing when I say solve the case, means I have provided enough evidence to prove who probably did it, but it's not going to a court of law. So, you know, the guy's not going to be found guilty, and therefore people say, well, you didn't solve the case. Well, maybe you did, but you can't take credit for it because, first of all, it's the detective's case, and I don't come there to, you know, do that to the detectives. Most my casework was quietly done. But I used a bunch of aliases with this to just show how things work. And so anyway, I get this call last week from a defense attorney in California. It says, we read about this case in your book. And the prosecution has stated that they are not going to allow because I sent the profile actually to the police department. I worked for the family at the time. I sent the profile to the police department. They looked into some of the possible suspects way back then. And it never went anywhere until the DNA popped up and supposedly has connected someone to this case. So anyway, he says, well, the prosecution is not going to allow this in. They're not. And he said, but we think it's fascinating what you wrote. And we think one of the pieces of evidence that you say, you know, is from the crime scene. It's actually connected to this other guy that they had looked into just before the defendant. And they said, so we're really interested in you working, you know, talking to us about this. I said, okay. So they said, can we talk to you next week? And I said, all right. I said, well, here's the deal. So then I sent them over a nice email that said, okay, here's what I need to work for you. First of all, you're going to pay me because you're making money, and I'm not going to sit here and do all your work for nothing. I will reanalyze this entire case. I need the police reports for your suspect. I need all the evidence for your suspect, and so on and so forth. And I would also like to see the reports on the other guy. And if, you know, first of all, I don't want to work for you if your guy's guilty as hell. I don't care about the money. I'm not going to help you try to get around things so you can leave a guy out there who is a serial killer. No, I'm not going to do that. So if I look at this thing and say, you know, this dude is not guilty, I will work on this case. But I'm not gonna do that. But I can tell you, it was a very good question. There are some people who will work for a defense attorney, regardless of what the evidence shows, and will take the money and make a lot of money to say whatever somebody wants them to say. And I'm not going to comment necessarily that's what John Douglas did, but I personally don't see how JonBenet is a stranger crime. So we'll have to do that as another one of the cases in the future. Let's see let's see if we got anybody else out here. Okay, that's that one. Oh wait, I think you asked that question. I'm just checking on my questions now to see. Oh, lots of people are here now. Cool. Hi, everybody. Hi, Martin. Hey, Martin. Nice to see you here. Oh, Catalina. Nice to see you here. Who else do we have here? I'm trying to see if we have any other questions coming in. So feel free to comment right now because that's why I'm here. I'm here to answer questions because I say most of the time you don't get to actually ask these questions, and I think it's important. And some people do want to know how I got to be a profiler. The profiler book that I just showed you, that does explain how I became a profiler. And I was not an FBI profiler, and I was not a police officer. I was actually, at the time, a homeschooling mom with, I did sign language interpreting for the hospitals. And I rented a room to a guy, and 4 weeks after he moved in, there was a murder of a jogger on a path near my home, and it was a path that he took every day. And the day that the girl was killed, he had been at the other end of the path at his girlfriend's house, and she had broken up with him like an hour before the girl was killed. And he was all pissed off. And he walked home. And when he came back to my house, just about the local time that he would have hit the spot where the girl was killed, he would have been there. And the next day, he threw away all his clothing. There was a lot of evidence saying this is somebody really good to look at in this crime. And so I took the evidence into the police, and at the time, they just pretty much ignored him. And he later became the #1 suspect and was for many years. And the case is very convoluted now. My book came out, and so I can't talk about what happened then. I'm going to pursue a FOIA request at some point in time in the future. So that's a long story. But that's my interest wasn't that I was trying to prove this guy was guilty. My concern was that I had turned in evidence right after the crime as a citizen, and they didn't even come and talk to the guy. They didn't even talk to him. And I'm like, how could you, a guy, he threw all his clothing away after wading through the stream the girl was killed in. He says he was there, walking down the path, and he wrote a story calling himself, and he said, death used my name, and death wore my face, and death used my name, and I killed people in a park. I think I would look into this guy, at least check him out. And it took them 7 years before they checked him out. And he failed the polygraph, and he became the #1 suspect. But my concern was, how can this happen? How can we have such poor handling? Now I'll say to you, the guys that were handling this crime had never done a homicide, I think, in their history. So they had no idea what they were doing. So that's the way things work sometimes. And so I started studying, and the funny thing about it was that it was very hard to there were no programs. Now, I say it was the first criminal profiling program in the country, but at the time there were no programs. You could go and eventually get a forensics degree, but that's a piece of it. You could get some psychology degree. That's a tiny piece of it. You really need crime analysis. That's the main thing. And it really just didn't exist at the time. And so I started studying on my own, and I read some 400 books. Because as soon as I read one, I don't mean read like you do in college, where you're like get through this crap and throw it. No, I was like reading and taking notes, and the minute it said, you could, here's another book that's really connected to this, you should read this book, I immediately went and ordered it until I had 400 books, which I read. And I went to seminars. I went to the same seminars police went to. So yes, I was, as they put it sometimes, self-trained. I eventually got a criminal degree, a master's degree in criminal justice. And as I say, I wrote the program. But my big concern was that cases were not being, the training wasn't there, that they weren't being handled correctly from the beginning, and that criminal profiling was done completely incorrectly. Because the FBI stuff, as I said, it didn't, it doesn't focus on evidence. It focuses on inductive profiling, which is a lot of guesswork. And one of the things I would like to ask this for the listeners, can you tell me if FBI profiling has been so successful, please tell me what crimes they solved. Anybody? I'm going to hit the comment button and see if anybody can come up with anything. Okay, especially the serial homicides. How many serial homicide cases can you say they came in and solved? Like Ted Bundy? No. Like Green River Killer? No. Yeah, BTK? No. Anybody? So there you go. So you have this problem that you would think if it was such a successful method, you could point to a whole pile of cases, which, well, we did this and this and this and this and this. Christine says pretty much accurately. None. The closest I would say is the Atlanta child killer. Now they're trying to say he didn't do it, but they actually were brought in, and they had some ideas about how he might operate, and that's when they found the body being tossed into a river. I would say that one, they actually got in there and did some work while they were still investigating. As I pointed out, that's when you should do it. And they were looking at behavioral patterns and that evidence. So I think they did a pretty good job on that one. I'm not saying they don't do some good work. My favorite, if you want to ask me my favorite FBI profiler, that would be Robert Ressler. He's the one profiler I've known from the FBI who I have some kind of, I really believe that he had some good, he did a lot more deductive than a lot of other people. And so I think he was probably the most credible of the ones working in the unit as far as his methodologies went. So I really like that. Oh, here we have a good question here. Let's see. What has been your favorite case you have profiled? I came across you and your work with the McCann case, but really enjoyed everything that you do. Well, thank you, Ross. That's really nice. Yeah, the McCann case, oh my Lord. And I know some of you are very familiar with the Madeleine McCann case. I've done something with Lizzie before on that. I've done her show. And I will probably do maybe that'll be one of my special shows on, which is turning into a historical case now, isn't it? Because it's been so long. So I will probably do something on that. That is one of the most fascinating cases because we just don't know why the government is doing what the government is doing. And I know there's lots of crazy theories about that, but when Scotland Yard came in and said, they're not going to, we're starting looking at this case we're already going to say it's an abduction. We're not going to look at the McCanns. That's it. That's not the way you start profiling a case. That's not the way you analyze a case. What you do, when I go to police departments and work with them, they sometimes will say, you know who I think? I said, I don't want to know who you think it is. Just give me the evidence. Let me start with the crime scene, and I will let the evidence tell me what happened. But Scotland Yard started out by saying, we're already determined it's an abduction before we looked at anything. And so I said, there's something completely wrong with this. And of course, years later, they've had no success whatsoever, except to spend a whole lot of the money of the citizens of the UK. And of course, now they have this German suspect, which has got no evidence linking him. That's not Scotland Yard didn't get that. That's the German prosecutor who says he's got a suspect, which there's nothing linking him to the crime. And of course, we're still ignoring evidence that exists. So the McCann case I will do, because that is a really freaky case that has gone on forever. And I have some other favorite cases, and we'll talk about them and some other shows. I think they're really good. Oh, look who's here. Hi, Joyce. That's my sister. So, yay. Nice to have you here. That's so sweet to see you here. Aw, that's my sister. Let me see. Oh, the who? I'm looking at this one. Looking Orrin and Orrin West. The adopted parents. I'm going to have to check that one out. Luckily, the comments stay up. And if you want to send me something you would like me to do in the future, please do that. I have a very simple email. I'm going to put it up somewhere here. Profilerpatbrown@gmail.com. Profilerpatbrown@gmail.com. And you can also contact me through Facebook or whatever, or Twitter. If you have some ideas about what you really want me to talk about, like this case, and I'm blanking on this one. So it'll give me ideas of cases I can look into, and then I can present so that you can, the point being that you can come here and actually, get some information, and that'll be fun. Do I have any more? Let's see what I'm trying to check here. Okay, let's see what else I got here. That's really nice people. So can anybody tell me the one case that you would love me to talk about at some point in my lifetime on the show? So maybe next Sunday or the Sunday after. We've been here an hour, so I'm going to probably close everything out right now. But if you've got a couple ones you just want to throw up there really quick about what you would like to see in the future, that would be really cool. And I'll let you think about that while I'll introduce you to a few other books I have. Killing for Sport. This book, hold on a second. Okay. Killing for Sport. This was the first book I actually ever wrote. And I wrote that because when people talk about serial killers, they got serial killers so wrong, it's ridiculous. That's not the way serial killers behave. Just like when we have Hannibal Lecter, he's supposed to be a cannibal. And yet he's extremely violent. And most cannibal guys aren't very violent. They just want to get the guy dead really quick so then they can enjoy them after the fact. They're not really into the violent aspects very much. So that's completely not true. There's things like, oh, they're so brilliant, like Hannibal Lecter. He's just so brilliant. No, most of them just regular guys. Some of them aren't all that bright at all, and they just get away with their crimes because they're lucky. So I'll be talking a lot more about serial killers, but that's the first book I ever wrote, and it's still a great book on what really the way they function. Here's a book, How to Save Your Daughter's Life. I wrote this book because of serial killers, serial predators, date rapists, any kind of guy that will get into your daughter's life and cause her trouble. And it's funny because I got attacked for this book because, oh, you're blaming the victim, because I was teaching parents how to help their daughters not to get in situations where they would come in contact with these people. So somehow that's blaming the victim, but that's the way people like to say things. Oh, this one, oops, where is it? Oh, Profile the Disappearance of Madeleine McCann. That is my profile. By the way, you can get all my books on Amazon except for this book. This is the book that the McCanns had their attorneys, Carter Ruck, get pulled from Amazon. So you have to go to Smashwords or Barnes & Noble, maybe a few. I think I usually tell people to go to Smashwords, and it's $2.99, and you can get a chance to read my profile of Madeleine McCann. And but you won't get it on, you certainly won't get it on Amazon. Oh, here's one more. This is one of my favorite books. It's Only the Truth. It's my fiction book. I'm writing some more fiction books, some mysteries. And I love this book, and it's been real well received by the public. It's only $2.99 at Amazon. It's a great mystery story, and it's a love story too. So might want to pick that one up because it's a really nice story and makes people, I don't know, people really enjoy that one. Okay, I'm going to check out my comments for one last thought here. Do I? Okay, this is Martin. Oh my goodness. Wow. It's the problem with doing so many cases. Let me take this other thing off. Hold on a second. Hold on. Where's my face? Let me take. There I am. Okay. So Martin asked, have you any thoughts about Kurt Cobain? Do you think it was a suicide? God, you do so many cases that you can't remember them very well, unless it's something really and that I've worked for a long time or that's pretty recent. I start forgetting. They'll sort of start blending together. So I don't know. But I'll tell you what's interesting about a lot of suicides. And I'll finish up the show with this. I have been approached by many families who say, my child did not commit suicide. My boy did not commit suicide. My daughter did not kill herself. He did not hang himself. He didn't shoot himself. And most of the time, that it actually is a suicide. Families, for some reason, I think the guilt of not realizing your child was in trouble, not being able to stop them before they did it, oddly makes them prefer somebody to murder them, which I always thought kind of strange, but I guess that's the way guilt works. But most of the time when the police determine it's a suicide, most of the time it is actually a suicide. And the evidence is usually fairly strong that it's a suicide. And interestingly enough, there's often a lot of behavioral evidence right before that it's a suicide. One of my favorite stories about that, I got a case from a woman. She said, my son did not commit suicide. And his son was probably in his 30s, I think, maybe early 30s. And this was the story she told me. So my son came over to my house in a rage. He came in the front door and I said, what's wrong, son? And he pushed by me and he went to the wall and he grabbed the shotgun off the wall. Then he stormed out and I was like, oh, what's happening? And he went home, and a few hours later, the police called me and told me he was dead of a suicidal shot with a shotgun. I know that's not true. I know it was a homicide. And I'm thinking, okay, so he went back to his trailer. The front door, the place was locked. When the police got there, it was locked from the inside. He's sitting on the couch with the shotgun between his knees right after he grabbed the shotgun out of your house, and yet that mother still said somebody came in, took the shotgun, shot him, and somehow locked up the house. So that's how deeply some people cannot admit that their child or their loved one or whoever it was suicidal. So most of the time, it is suicide. However, there are rare occasions where somebody does stage a suicide, homicide to make it look like a suicide. I do have a couple cases like that. So I never say absolutely, oh, it couldn't be, but I will have to check into the Kurt Cobain thing and see what I think of that, because I've forgotten how it all went down. So, but I'll look into that one. I just saw a couple. Oh, aren't you nice? Okay. Thank you, Lizzie. She says, don't forget to hit like and subscribe to Pat so you'll be notified when she does her next live. Thank you. I forget to, this is my first live, so I'm forgetting what I'm supposed to say. So thank you, Lizzie, for being there to keep me on the straight and narrow. Oh, and one thing. Oh, I got to look at this one. Have you profiled Meghan Markle and if she is being truthful in her accusations? Okay. I always say it like this. I can't say she's a narcissist because I haven't interviewed her. As a profiler, I can't say she's a narcissist. I can say that some of her behaviors certainly represent some real serious narcissism. From the very beginning, she looked like an attention seeker to me. She always she said she wanted to grow up to be a princess, and she got to be a princess. But, being a princess is not as fun in person as it is in your little fantasies, because you have a thing called responsibilities and duties that come with that position. Apparently, she did not want those. And so she has convinced her husband to get out of there. I think he's got like Stockholm syndrome with her. Some people just say pussy whip, but okay. Stockholm syndrome, I'll go with that. And do I believe her accusations about the whole thing about Archie? They're so worried about him being dark. Well, first of all, Meghan Markle is very light-skinned. She is like, I wouldn't even say she's biracial. I say she's 1/4 black, 3/4 white. So her son is going to be 1/8 black and 7/8 white. So he looks pretty darn white. I'm not into the whole thing where we have to label people by their color, but if you're going to make the accusation that they're so paranoid about Archie being dark-skinned, really? You got Meghan Markle, who is, you wouldn't even know is, quote, black, and you got her husband who is as pale gets, really gingery, and you're going to come up with a kid who what? Looks like Kunta Kinte? I mean, it's just kind of ludicrous. And I think she just loves attention, and she gets the attention she wants. And Oprah plays into it because Oprah likes attention too, and they all make a whole bunch of money. So somebody just said they think she wants to run for president of the United States. I'm like, you gotta be kidding me. She's going to go into politics. But that again would be that kind of a personality who wants a tremendous amount of attention. So I wouldn't be really surprised. Oh, okay, I'm going to do one more, and then I'm going to probably have to close out on this one. But Mia Farrow versus Woody Allen. Oh, unfortunately, there really was never sufficient evidence that Woody Allen did anything back in the day. He may come across as creepy to people, and maybe he did like his, adopted daughter too much, but when she was an adult, it's a little weird. Okay. I'm not saying I approve of everything, but I don't think there was ever sufficient evidence. When we have a divorce situation, there are many times when one parent will tell the child, will encourage the child to remember things and to say things in order to get the other parent in trouble. And many times it actually is a female trying to get the husband in trouble, because everybody wants to protect a child. So my theory has always been this, television again should have stayed out of this. To make a documentary on this and to have all this nastiness and basically accusations, just they're accusations, there's no proof of anything. I think it's despicable, and I think none of us have to be there for that. I mean, I think that's a family matter at this point, and I find it appalling, absolutely appalling, and so I refuse to get involved in that one. So anyway, I'm going to close out for today, and as Lizzie says, please do hit the subscribe button and like, and I will be here next week, Sunday. And you can, again, send any ideas to me to profilerpatbrown@gmail.com, or you can click, send something to Twitter, Facebook. I'm around, and I'll see it, and I'll start working on which direction I might go with some of these ideas. But you've got great ideas, and they'll make for some great shows. So thank you, everybody, for being here. it's been a lot of fun for my first broadcast that's live. So awesome. So see you next week, and look forward to the my profile of The Silence of the Lambs coming up in a video. Bye. See you next week.